welcome to the Sports Pro podcast. My name's Sam Carp, I'm the features editor here at Sports Pro, and this week, the Kansas City Chiefs will look to win a third consecutive Super Bowl when they take on the Philadelphia Eagles at Caesars Superdome in New Orleans. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at how the two teams stack up off the field and talk through some of the key business storylines around this year's game, including the potential for record viewership on Fox and, of course, the commercials. In part 2 of the show, we'll also be hearing from Marissa Daly, who's the Vice President and General Manager of the Los Angeles Rams. But first, I'm joined by Sports Pro technology editor Steve McCaskill and our reporter Josh Sim to talk all things Super Bowl 59. Steve, this is the first time that we've had you on this year. You deserted us for all of January for Stream Time Sports, our sister podcast, but we have managed to negotiate your return on a long-term basis, I hope.
Don't hate multi-channel McCaskill. That's what I do these days. I'm here, there, everywhere. I'm platform agnostic.
Are you trademarking that? Just hoping it catches on?
I'm not sure. It might be misconstrued, to be fair, the more I think about it. But, from media perspective, I'll go anywhere.
Josh, you have been on the podcast this year, but you're also back from somewhere a little bit more interesting than Stream Time. How was your trip to Malaysia? Anything sport-related happen while you were there?
Yeah, I went back for a family wedding and Chinese New Year. And sport-related, I think the Malaysian Open in badminton was on at the time. So I watched a handful of that. That's probably Malaysia's national sport. So watched a bit of badminton and was in the right time zone for the Australian Open for a rare occasion. So made the use of that as well. Thankfully, my grandmother had sports channels on her TV, so made full use of that. But that's about as much sports content I sort of consumed while out there.
Lovely stuff. Did it feel like NFL playoff fever, which was catching on at all in Malaysia while you were out there?
Not really. It's not a huge sport out there. Maybe some NFL officials now listening and makes it a priority area to sort of market in. But badminton's probably number one, and then soccer, football would be number two. So the league's going to have to do a lot of work if they want to make Malaysia the next international marketing area or something like that.
Did Malaysia ever host a Premier League Asia Cup, or is that before your time, Josh? Actually, don't answer the second bit. That'll make you feel very old. But
I feel like you're asking that with knowing the answer to it.
I believe they have, I think. Or I might be confusing with Singapore. I've seen Liverpool play in Malaysia like in the mid-2000s, and I know it's a popular area for clubs to go around for preseason tours. But I think they've done one Barclays Asia Trophy, if that's what it's called, out there.
Oh, I can't remember the exact sponsor attribution. I actually can't remember when this was. I just know Birmingham City were in one of them, so it's that era. And it was when I said that, I was like, Josh, we actually around for that. So I'm happy to move on from that quite swiftly.
We can move on from that. We'll wait and see if the NFL does choose Malaysia as its next kind of international hub. Well, news this week that's probably going to Australia, or news of where it might be going in Australia anyway as well. I think the MCG was rumoured. But closer to home is the Super Bowl this weekend, gents, as I'm sure you're well aware, between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles at Caesars Superdome in New Orleans. I assume you'll both be watching it. Steve, I noticed that you were on annual leave the day after, so I can only presume that was a tactical move to make sure that you can stick with it until the bitter end in the early hours here in the UK.
I think in the last 20 years, I've only slept through 2 Super Bowls. One was when they had the power cut at the stadium, and I decided, no, I'm done. And that was my first year, I think, as working in London, and I was commuting 4 hours a day, and I was tactical. And then the same was last year, which was my first after becoming a father. And I fell asleep at the start of overtime, and I woke up just as Kansas City were winning, and I was like, what on earth had just happened? I'm really confused. So the day off might be needed.
Josh, any stories to share about falling asleep mid Super Bowl, or do you usually manage to stick it out?
The most memorable time I've watched it was at uni, I think. The SU at Warwick, where I went to, did like lots of snack hats and food platters and stuff, and they had a big screen up. So that's probably my strongest memory of watching it. I think New Orleans, the time zone's not as favorable for Europe, so I don't know this time round. Usually the goal is to make it to the halftime show and then decide from there, but given the Eagles and the Chiefs offensive potency, it might go down to the wire, which will make things slightly difficult for me to decide at 2-3 a.m, whatever it is.
Will you be watching?
I do similar to Josh. I usually try to stick it out until the halftime show, and then it's just, I don't take the day off the next day. So I usually take myself off to bed at that point and then watch the highlights on my lunch break on the Monday. Although one time that I managed to rope people into watching it with me at uni, I think it was the Broncos, the year that they had an incredibly good defense and the score was like 10-6 or something like that. And it was arguably the most boring evening that me and my friends have ever endured together. And there's quite a few nominees for that category. But yeah, I'll try to make it till half time, watch a bit of Kendrick Lamar and then take myself off to bed. Moving on from that, I know the pair of you are our resident NFL experts in the Sports Pro editorial team. So before the Eagles and Chiefs go head to head on the field, I thought we'd pit Josh Sim and Steve McCaskill head to head off it to kind of test your knowledge about who's winning the off-field battle between these two teams. Very quick fire stuff. We'll take it in turns. Josh, you can go first as you wrote the most recent NFL story, as far as I can see, on the site between the pair of you. That's how I decided this order. So the first question, Josh, is according to Forbes' most recent NFL valuations, who is more valuable, the Chiefs or the Eagles?
I believe that is the Eagles by an extra million or so. I think the gap is between them. I guess a bigger city probably help us with that. Kansas being a smaller market. So yeah, the Eagles.
I assume you meant billion when you said billion, but I won't.
Sorry. Yes, I did.
We've already got to the Dr. Evil stage of this podcast.
Yeah, I'm there already. I'm listening closely for the detail, Josh, just like my editing. Bonus point for either of you if you can guess how much the Eagles are worth.
6.5 billion?
Very close. I'm going to give you a bonus point for that. 6.6.
Okay.
6.6 billion, the Eagles. The Chiefs, 4.85 billion. So 1.5 billion more than the Chiefs, the Eagles in value. Steve, an opportunity now for you to get a point back. Which stadium holds more fans? Is it the Chiefs Arrowhead Stadium or is it the Eagles Lincoln Financial Field?
Oh, I'm going to go for, it's a really good question and one I don't know the answer to. I'm going to guess Eagles.
So the Eagles Lincoln Financial Field holds 67,594. Arrowhead Stadium holds 76,416. So I'm afraid you're incorrect. Josh has a chance to wrap it up right here, right now, with the third question of this quickfire quiz. So, Josh, for the crown of what could become an annual Sports Pro podcast Super Bowl quickfire quiz rounds, who has the biggest social media following? This is as of today, time of recording on Tuesday, across TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, as we now must say, and YouTube. Is it the Chiefs or the Eagles?
I assume, given the individual star power of some of the Chiefs players, the Chiefs.
You would be right to assume that, but you've assumed wrong, Josh. It is actually the Eagles who have the bigger social media following. Steve, I'll give you a chance to guess how many social media followers the Eagles have to try and get a bonus point. If you get within 500k, then I'll go with you.
Why do I never read the broadcast bits of our commercial guides? Honestly,
exactly.
It exposes my complete lack of research. How many social followers?
Yeah, across those 5 platforms that I just mentioned.
Do the Eagles have?
Yeah,
10.2 million.
16.8 million. So not within 500k, and that's just ahead of the Chiefs, who have 16.2 million. Which, yeah, Josh, surprising given obviously Mahomes, Kelsey, and the kind of Taylor Swift effect that we've seen over the past 12 months. But the Eagles, it seems, are very strong on the legacy platforms. X and Facebook is what pulled them ahead of the Chiefs, who have very strong followings on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Okay, Steve, for a point, we'll finish it up anyway. Which of these two teams has seen more year-over-year sponsorship growth over the past 12 months? This is according to Sponsor United.
I mean, what can we get to the broadcast bit soon? That'd be lovely. I'm going to go for the Chiefs.
It is the Chiefs. You got a point. 12% year over year to a total of 88 brand deals. The Eagles grew 10% year over year to 116, which is also interesting in its own right. But Josh, congratulations. You are the winner of this quickfire quiz. Steve continuing his record at Sports Pro podcast quizzes. But just a way to ease into it, I think obviously this Sunday, Super Bowl is happening in New Orleans. It is the 11th time that the Super Bowl has happened in that city. Perhaps that should have been a question as part of the quiz. How many times has New Orleans hosted? But yeah, that's the joint most with Miami for the most ever. Last hosted in 2013. First time since the Caesars Superdome underwent a $550 million renovation as well. I guess, can either of you just kind of speak to the facts a little bit about, why a city is so desperate to host the Super Bowl? What's New Orleans going to get out of having these two teams come to town at the weekend?
Well, I mean, like any major sporting event, it brings attention, it brings tourists. It's also a way to showcase the city to, I guess, the rest of the US, puts it on a global stage. Of course, competition between cities to host a Super Bowl is usually limited to ones with the better weather or a roof. So not everyone can partake in it. I think the only cold weather Super Bowl ever was, well, not cold weather, but the only one in a traditional cold weather area was the MetLife Stadium when it first opened. But those that do fulfill those criteria, it's a combination of all those things. It's about local economy. It's about those commercial opportunities, especially, with naming rights being so prevalent in American sport. And of course, the way that American government is structured, where you have city, state, and federal phases, there's lots of different, I guess, competing agendas or competing priorities to bring these major events to your city. And in the US, there's nothing bigger than the Super Bowl in terms of what it can deliver for the local economy, the local pride as well. I mean, we've seen all of those economic evaluations about the value of public money going into building new stadiums. Often the economic reality doesn't reflect that. So sometimes it's a bit of both. You can say that it's brought this much money in, even if perhaps it hasn't always.
Yeah, I think also Super Bowl feels like, from afar anyway, I've not been to a Super Bowl yet. If anyone would like to invite me out there, they're welcome to. But it feels like from afar, it's not just about the one day. It's very much like a week-long festival. You hear of brands hosting parties, agencies hosting parties, lots of that kind of stuff going on, similar to a kind of, I guess, what an all-star weekend would be like. It's a big opportunity for that sponsorship activation across the entire week. And so if you're a host city, you've got all that stuff going on. It's an opportunity to generate tourism, not just on the day of the event, but throughout the whole week. And I think it also feels like one of those events where fans of the two teams, irrespective of whether they get a ticket, they'll want to be in that city to be close to what's going on. I remember Chris Stone of our sister podcast famously, when the Bengals got to the Super Bowl a few years ago, flying out to LA for that. So that also feels like very much kind of part of the tradition of the Super Bowl, at least over in the States.
Yeah, I think there's nothing else like it in American sport in that regard, because the Stanley Cup, the NBA Finals, the World Series, they alternate between the home and away teams. You don't really have that festival-style atmosphere. The only comparable thing is either the NBA All-Star Game in terms of what it does for that league, and maybe WrestleMania, if you want to bring in that way. Maybe, perhaps the US Open tennis. They don't tend to have these single event destinations that, I guess a Champions League final we have in Europe, or FA Cup final, that sort of thing that we can build around. And of course, being America and having that commercial element, it's everything turned up to 11.
I think as well, it just speaks to how the parity of the NFL, and like how I know the Chiefs of late have done repeat trips to the Super Bowl, but generally speaking, it's a once in a 10, 20 year opportunity if your team makes it there. So it just speaks to how that league is set up, and how, most teams feel like once you're there in the Super Bowl, then it is really maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity to see your team win it. And people will pay to see that, because it's obviously a big source of pride thing for team and for city and for everyone involved.
One thing that I've always thought really weird is, looking from a British perspective, are these press releases about how expensive tickets are getting, which seem to be celebrating dynamic pricing, which is something we don't have in the UK. It's almost like this is a badge of honor, whereas it's like, is it really? But getting into the Super Bowl as a fan requires a lot of money, and to be honest, a lot of access to people who can get you tickets as well. So there is that element to it. So, Sam, what you were saying about it being a festival, that as far as some people get.
Yeah, and that 80,000 capacity suddenly gets a lot smaller once you factor in all of those commercial partners that you mentioned. Probably one of the areas where it maybe is similar to a Champions League final, for example. But yeah, I did have a quick browse of Ticketmaster before we jumped on here, and $45,000, most expensive ticket on there at the moment. That's for a Plaza Club ticket right on halfway, but you can still get one for as little as $3,784. So there's a bargain to be had for people wanting a last minute trip to New Orleans. If you fancy, you've got the day off, Steve. So if you wanted to fly out and take your day off out from there instead.
I'm not going to reveal how much the most expensive ticket I've ever bought is, but $3,000 would be a lot. I think it would have to be Green Bay for me even to think about this. And not until I've moved house again, I think that would be politically unwise.
Yeah. I guess we should also mention likely to be heightened security in New Orleans this year. Obviously, event taking place about a month after 14 people were killed in a terrorist attack in the city. officials were saying this week that 2,700 state, federal and local law enforcement are going to be out there securing the game. So hopefully that's the last we kind of have to talk about security in relation to this year's Super Bowl. So I'm going to move on now, chaps, to kind of away from the host city and just to kind of, the event itself, as you've spoken about, Steve, it's a bit of a festival, and basically the Super Bowl every year without fail kind of ranks as the most watched television program in the US. So I want to kind of ask you guys, what you're going to be watching out for when this game's taking place this weekend. Steve, we'll maybe start with you on this one. What are you kind of keeping an eye on?
I think the biggest thing is, let's look at the ratings for this year in terms of whether it's going to be a record, which was set last year. I think it was 123.4 million was the US audience for this, which was a new record, boosted by the fact that the game went to overtime, which I slept through. It was, the fact it was an exciting game very much towards the end will have helped. The other thing is that it's a bit difficult to compare ratings now because most of these figures now include out of home viewing. So a lot of the Super Bowls of years gone by will look like they have a smaller rating, but it doesn't include, I think, bars and restaurants, whereas they now do. This is where my knowledge becomes slightly undone a bit in terms of ratings measurements, but I believe Nielsen is now going to be able to track even more out of home viewing this year. So there's every chance that could have an impact. And I think interest is going to be quite high in this in terms of, it's Philadelphia, so it's a big market team. It's a rematch, which might help things. There's plenty of star power, Mahomes, Kelsey, Saquon Barkley, I think Kansas are looking to win, it's one of my least favorite terms in American sport, which is three-peat. I've seen it used in contest of Six Nations, and I was like, no. If we had room 101 on this pod, that would go in there. We'd be three-peat. I'm winningest as well, obviously. So, you've got that storyline as well. And for me, the Eagles are the best team in football against a Kansas team that have, I'm not going to say rode the luck, but a lot of narrow victories this year. And I thought they could win the playoffs. So it's going to be a really well-balanced game in terms of on the field and off the field appeal. And I have no idea if this is going to have a huge impact, but the game is going to be streamed on Tubi, which means that it will be available to anyone with, an internet connection. Also, if you have an aerial as well, you can still get Fox. So yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm going to be looking out for more than anything else.
Yeah, I think obviously the last time that Fox broadcast a Super Bowl 2023 was also these two teams. Back then, that game generated about 115 million viewers. The number to beat is 123.7 million from last year on CBS. That's an interesting point of comparison, I suppose, because the growth of about 8 million last year. You mentioned overtime, close game. Also, I guess the Taylor Swift effect. A lot of people were quite keen to highlight that last year. I don't know if that should obviously be there again this year. There's been talk that Caitlin Clark might even join her this time. But, I wonder if there's a bit of fatigue around that at the moment. So I guess the question is whether enough change within that dynamic that you just mentioned, and in terms of the sort of distribution options available to Fox as well, to I guess soar past that 123 million figure, or whether it's kind of, whether we might see maybe a retreat.
I think, look, the Super Bowl is the most watched TV program in America. Last year was the most watched TV program ever. Figures have been down a bit this year, which I think is perhaps inevitably giving a bit of tail off from the Taylor Swift effect, but it's still very strong. And also, there's been more political programming this year because of the election. That could have had a bit of a splinter in the audience. And perhaps the previous figure was just too high to maintain, even for the NFL, which constantly seems to find new sources of growth. It also has more inventory as well, like it's constantly carving out new time slots. So there's lots of different factors at play. The Super Bowl is a de facto national holiday. I'm pretty sure that short-term gain in audience last year, Taylor Swift effect, will be converted into long-term viewership for the Super Bowl, which even if you don't like sports, people watch. Like I don't think with anything in Europe that compares with that phenomenon. It's just a thing that people do. So yeah, I think it's going to be a record, especially if it's a close game and especially if it goes to overtime.
Josh, would you agree with that? But to be fair, on the viewership side of things as well, based on Roger Goodell's comments this week that he's been making before the game, he doesn't seem too concerned about some of those slight viewership drops that you mentioned, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Chiefs have consistently sort of been the most, in terms of games this season that have sort of set viewership highs, they've been involved in there generally. So yeah, I think I'm going to hedge my bets on whether it's going to sort of beat last year's figure, but I think it's going to be definitely up there in terms of one of the most watched things. And I think the other thing that we maybe haven't mentioned, because it's sort of adjacent, is that it'll be the first time Tom Brady is doing color commentary for the game. And I imagine there'll be people sort of interested just to see how he does as a co-commentator. And especially given, the gray area between his role as a Raiders minority owner, but then also sort of having to give analysis and insight on the game as well. So like Steve said, it's something that people tune into, like people do watch parties at home, gather people around or at like bars and stuff. So I imagine that it's going to be, I don't know if I think given the way that it's tailed off compared to last year in terms of regular season, I don't know if it'll hit the same heights in terms of the final viewership, but I'm sure that it'll be a huge draw for Fox.
I think, you hit the nail on the head about the popularity of the Chiefs, and the audience for the AFC Championship game against the Bills was huge. The Chiefs are the biggest TV draw in the NFL at the minute, so to have them in Super Bowl should mean you get that boost. I'm sure Fox are delighted with that.
Yeah, well, that leads quite nicely into the thing that I'm going to be watching out for, gents. Obviously, those massive audiences essentially mean that brands are desperate to be associated with the Super Bowl, really keen to be part of the broadcast on Fox. And reports last week said that at least 10 of the ad spots that have sold on Fox, where they're usually 15-second, 30-second, 60-second slots, have sold for $8 million, which would be a record for Super Bowl ads. For context, Fox averaged $6.5 million per slot when it last broadcast the game in 2023. So some significant growth there. And you mentioned before, Steve, about kind of, this is an event that people watch irrespective of whether they like American football or not. Obviously, some people will be tuning in because they like Kendrick Lamar at halftime, but some people actually do tune in for these ads as well, myself included, which is why it's my thing to watch out for this weekend. But yeah, think of here in the UK when you're watching a Premier League game on a Sunday, or even the Champions League final, halftime is the point when you get up to go to the toilet. If you're in the pub, it's the point you go to get another beer. It's when you go to grab your snack or whatever it is. I was reading the results of an Ipsos survey, which said that 78% of respondents say that they watch the ads. 1 in 4 respondents said they attentively watch, and 11% say it's the primary reason. So there are people who genuinely tune into this game just to watch those commercials. Those people are out there. And I think the kind of rising cost of those ads, a lot of people will be saying, is it worth that amount of money for 30 seconds? But I think it's kind of important to point out that brands increasingly now are purchasing these slots very, very early and are actually releasing a sequence of ads in the build up to the big event. So Stella Artois, for example, they've done quite a big campaign. It's about the other David, which is David Beckham's long lost twin. I assume it's a metaphorical long lost twin rather than a real one. There have been a few ad spots that have run in the build up to this game, and it's all going to be revealed during Fox's broadcast on Sunday. So that's kind of, a lot of brands are able to build a storyline around their ads. They put significant production behind it. They enlist serious talent. David Beckham's just one example. I think Hellmann's have got Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan back together to recreate that famous Harry Met Sally scene at Cats. So there's loads of creativity that go into these. So that's kind of with my sponsorship and marketing hat on anyway. That's the thing that I'm going to be watching out for this weekend, and then also kind of the reaction to those on Monday, because there are winners and losers of these.
Yeah, I have seen that Stella Artois advert, and I saw it on a video billboard at Clapham Junction station this morning. So that was my first interaction with that. So that's in the UK. They're using David Beckham's appeal in the UK to preview an advert TV event in the US, which perhaps deserves its own conversation at some point. No, in terms of the non-serious analysis, in terms of halftime adverts in football, the greatest halftime advert, I think, in anything was the 1999 Champions League final, when Pepsi had an advert where Sir Alex Ferguson, the manager of Manchester United, threw a can of Pepsi to every squad member who caught it perfectly, apart from Peter Schmeichel, who was the goalkeeper, and everyone's heads just sank. And that was at half-time, which I thought was great. But yeah, nothing more to well from you, so I think there are people who watch the adverts. It's an unparalleled audience. They're almost like prestige things rather than quantifiable marketing value. I think Ridley Scott set the tone in the 80s for what would happen in terms of the advertising and the resources that go behind these. And I think most people who advertise from Super Bowl know that they can't objectively measure the impact beyond brand awareness, but they're still going to do it because it's great to be associated with the big event, especially if you're not an official partner.
Yeah, for sure. And some first-time advertisers this year as well should be pointed out. Haagen-Dazs for ice cream fans out there. Liquid Death for canned water brand fans. Duracell, Nestle Coffee Mate, Nerd Wallet, among the others as well. Josh, are you watching out for those ads, or is there something else that you're going to be keeping an eye on this weekend?
It's kind of linked, actually. This is like a really well done relay race we've done. I'm sort of looking at, because this will be the first Super Bowl that will have taken place since Blue Sky has sort of grown in popularity. And since some people have moved away from X, the NFL hasn't, and neither has its teams. Steve wrote an article based on a report that the Patriots has sort of been told by the league that they weren't able to set up a Blue Sky account. And I think there was a report in Sports Business Journal saying that the NFL knows that it sort of can play kingmaker in terms of the business and driving ads on a social media platform, and that's why it hasn't made the move yet. So as someone who probably spends more time now on Blue Sky than X and has seen sort of a number of senior NFL writers from sports outlets sort of join the platform, I'm interested to see sort of, what kind of engagement does it generate on that platform. And I don't think you could sort of compare them yet. I don't think they're necessarily apples to apples yet, but in terms of engagement and in terms of how will it sort of be covered from a social media perspective, because Blue Sky are still sort of rolling out. The video tools came relatively later, like in terms of sharing 1-minute videos and stuff like that. So I'll be interested to see sort of how users on the platform sort of interact with the game. And you can extend that similarly to Reddit, and sort of NFL communities stop using posts from X and putting them on Reddit. You can extend that to see how users of Reddit also sort of interact with the big game.
That's actually a really good point. And I joined Twitter on the same day as the Super Bowl in 2009 to follow the Super Bowl. So I remember the exact day I joined Twitter. Oh, goodness me, who played in that Super Bowl? It was the Steelers. I cannot remember who they played. I joined in a full conversation. That's what got me hooked on Twitter. And I think, I'll be on Blue Sky to see what the activity is like. I also quite like Blue Sky in terms of how it's my early impressions of it. Although I think my interaction with Blue Sky probably limited to the early part of the game before either the food or the beer has defeated me in my battle not to fall asleep.
I mean, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm curious because obviously the NFL and the teams aren't on Blue Sky. I wonder how many of the brands that are doing ads have a Blue Sky presence, whether they plan on putting that advert on Blue Sky or Reddit or whatever platform it is. Because there is an audience there. It's obviously not to the same numbers as X, given X's sort of prior sort of head start, but just curious to see how that shakes down. And obviously TikTok hasn't been banned in the US yet, so there'll still be obviously coverage on there. But yeah, interested to see whether there's a bit of any change in terms of how people interact with the game on social media.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also the point that Steve made is the Cardinals, by the way, Steve, that the Steelers beat.
Larry Fitzgerald, yes.
That was just off the top of my head, by the way, not opening a new tab and Googling it. Yeah, because, the part of the reason why Twitter became so big around sports fans is events like this really is that alludes to the point that you were making about the reason you signed up in the first place. It's kind of to have that, not a new concept at all, but that second screen kind of interaction and being able to see how other people are reacting to events in real time. So I think if you're Blue Sky, I'd be trying to drive quite a lot of signups this weekend, making quite a lot of noise about who is on the platform and things like that, and trying to do some sort of activation to make sure that there is quite a lot of engagement with the platform, because I'm still on Blue Sky. I haven't actually posted yet. Don't have a profile picture either. As far as I've got is launching an account just to kind of have a look around. And I think there's still probably quite a few people in the same position as me where they haven't necessarily gone over yet, because the point you were making, Josh, there's not a lot of teams officially on there yet. There's still some people who are reluctant to leave that audience that they have on Twitter behind to go and start afresh. So it'll be interesting to see, because you feel like these big sporting events are moments that kind of new platform like Blue Sky really has to capitalize on if it does want to keep growing. Speaking of fan engagement, chaps, Steve, you have been speaking this week with Marissa Daly, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Media at the LA Rams. And we're going to be listening into that interview for part 2 of this show. Just give us a quick preview of what you and Marissa have been talking about before we get into that.
Yeah, so we spoke about the role of data in fan engagement, specifically how the NFL and its teams are working with the Genius Sports, which is the data partner of the NFL. But the LA Rams are actually one of the first teams to incorporate that data and data-driven insight for the in-stadium experience. So I don't know if you remember, when SoFi Stadium hosted the Super Bowl, it's got a massive infinity screen, they call it, that was able to show some pretty, firstly, it's just a huge thing to look at, but it's also quite advanced in terms of what it can offer. So they've been offering things like mini maps and what have you to fans in the stands. A couple of years ago, there was this fear that the in-stadium experience might become inferior to the remote experience because of all these second screen applications, these digital enhancements, and I don't really buy that. There's nothing more I'd like to sit in the stands. I do want things like decent mobile connection and things like that, but it's all part of that wider drive to bridge the gap between being at home and being at the stadium. And of course, when you're paying that much for a ticket, you want the best possible experience. So we spoke about the value of data in fan engagement and a few other things to do with the LA Rams.
Lovely stuff. Well, let's hear from Marissa now.
So Marissa, we've seen this explosion of data in sport from pretty much everything, from performance to broadcast to just, I guess, the way that fans experience sport. So in your view, how important is data to the modern sports fan, and how do the LA Rams factor that in when it comes to content and serving your fan base?
Yeah, I think it's pretty paramount. When we're talking specifically about the live experience, it's something we want to maximize. We want to make sure that the people who are choosing to spend their day with us in person kind of get a very robust experience for those 5 hours from the time they leave their couch to the time they get back to their couch. And so we know that people are looking not just for the scores and kind of anything that's happening with game in progress. We know they want more. And we also know they're going to bring their phones with them. And so I think we want to make sure that the experience we're providing on the screen is complementary to what's happening on the field and what's happening with what they're looking at. So whether that's just a hardcore sports fan wanting to know more information about route trees or about the speed of the player, like how fast was Jared Verse on that scoop and score, or if they are looking at their fantasy scores, whatever that may be, we want to make sure that we can provide that experience for them and they're getting what they want while they're at a game.
You're working with Genius Sports to that end. There's all sorts of data that they collect from the NFL and from games involving in your team. How does that partnership help you achieve that? What do they help you do? How do they help you serve that fan base?
Yeah, there's so much time in a game where there isn't game action being played. And we want to make sure that we're providing, the best place to watch a game, but also the best place for our team to play football. And so oftentimes when we think about new partners, we try to evaluate a partner that can bring us both. And the partnership with Genius Sports does exactly that. It was great that we were able to work with our football side and say, hey, here's a partner we have. Here are the things we want to implement in game, and have them be equally impressed with it as our fans are. And so it was able to achieve both something that's informative and engaging to fans, but also something our football team was excited about as well.
These data features now, I remember a couple of years ago, there was some concerns that the in-stadium experience may not match up to the home experience because what was being offered by broadcasters and digital platforms was just so good and so different. So you're now offering these data-driven insights and highlights in the stadium. Can you give an idea of what fans can expect to see? How does this manifest itself for the game experience? What sort of features are they able to see?
I think we're very lucky at SoFi Stadium. It opened in 2020 as probably the most technologically advanced stadium out there. And so we strive to operate SoFi Stadium like it was built to do. And so with that, we get to, whether it's be first to market or work with these amazing partners that can use the building to our advantage. We have 80 million pixels. We have a 110-yard infinity screen board. And so we want to make sure that we are creating that in-bowl experience rivaling the at-home broadcast experience. You're starting to see broadcasts be able to do a lot of the overlays and kind of the things in near real time. And so, whether it's with Genius Sports, whether our relationship with Snap and our camera kit, whether it's Cosm cameras, all of those things kind of allow us to push the boundaries and use the building kind of the way it was intended to be used.
Speaking from a British perspective, some of the stuff that's possible in venues across the Atlantic is unreal. And that infinity screen is something that really stands out. I don't think there is anything that comes even close on our side of the pond. Some of the features that I've been, reading about, things like, the mini maps, or again, what you're talking about, the routes and just the additional data. Why were these settled on specifically? Why were they deemed to deliver the most value to the fan in their seat?
Yeah. I mean, I think one, we want to make sure we're working with our football side to make sure that we're keeping the integrity and the competitive advantage as a home game, right? So we never want to do anything that would disrupt the game of play from a competitive standpoint. So putting that aside, we want to give fans things that they think are interesting, right? And I use speed as something that I deem interesting, right? You don't realize how fast those players are running. And when a player gets up to 20 miles an hour running, that's crazy to think about how fast that would be on a treadmill. Like I would have fallen on my face, and I am not capable of hitting those speeds, right? Or when you look at how fast it takes Matthew to throw the ball, I think there are times when you're like, oh my gosh, how long are they in the pocket for? Like how fast is that? To be able to look at your progression as a quarterback and understand how quickly they are making decisions, I think it shows kind of the impressive nature of the athletes on the field, but also gives fans in the stands something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I guess it's discussion. I'll stop using British examples eventually, but we call it like pub arguments about who's faster, who can do what. Sometimes we compare it to different sports, which is impossible. But we're like, who's better. But I guess by seeing these stats, you can have that debate and keep the fans engaged. And I've been to the NFL in London, and yeah, there are times where there isn't anything happening on the field, or teams are setting up, or there's a timeout. So I completely get that, but there's more than fan engagement opportunities. There's commercial opportunities here. Having all this tech in the stadium, the displays, the other elements. How does that help the Rams from a business perspective? What can you offer potential partners yourselves?
Massively. I mean, I think we are a for-profit organization, right? And have a lot of partners that want those engaged eyeballs on game day. And then we also have a game plan on how to make this a super engaging kind of 5 hours from start to finish with fans. And so there's also, how do you pair those together? And when you can find a partnership where there's something we want to put in game and there's a partner that matches that perfectly, it's incredible. So our all access stats package, which is what we've kind of called what we do with Genius Sports and some of the activations there, Verizon came on to sponsor that. And so as Verizon is a humongous partner of the Rams and value with their 5G kind of speed to market and the things that they can do, it very much works really cohesively with this one specifically. But I think, right, a lot of partners are interested in innovation and in tech, and how can you bring that to an experience where fans can see their brand and what their brand stands for alongside something that's driving the game forward. And so this was a great example of that.
Yeah, it's interesting I mentioned Verizon, and one thing that is the Super Bowl tradition on our side is seeing the networking stats the day after the game, whether it's been the record, what people are doing. But that reflects that 5G and in-stadium connectivity is really important for this. So since we're talking about the in-stadium experience, how important is making sure that, obviously having this stuff on the infinity screen is great, but fans want to also share on social media. How important is that from an in-game perspective, given what you do with Verizon as well?
Yeah, massive. I mean, I think we want to engage with fans where they're at. And at that time, they're in SoFi Stadium, but we know they're going to be on their phones. Everyone is, whether it's texting their friends, whether it's checking their fantasy scores, whether it's wanting to see something else. Like, we want to make sure we're additive to that. And so what's great about the connectivity inside the stadium is that hopefully we're providing an experience where they can do the things they want to, but also providing enough on the board that they don't have to if they don't want to, right? So how does that work together? A lot of our partnership and monetization opportunities also have QR codes associated with it, right? So we may be doing a feature on the board. We show the QR code for the partner, easily accessible, right, with someone's mobile device. And so being able to make them work together rather than, I think, maybe a while ago, they felt competitive, right? How do we keep people's phones in their pockets? It's like, they're not going to do that. So let's use it to our advantage and make that part of the game day experience and part of how all of the technology works together.
And what other stadium technology initiatives have the Rams focused on? Obviously, media and content is a very important thing, as where you work on. But your SoFi Stadium, it's one of the most technologically advanced stadiums in the world. It can benefit from all these advances that we've had in recent years. So how does that all link together to deliver that experience? How does it make people, you say it's 5 hours on game day? How do you serve that as a totality?
Yeah, I mean, I think working together as an organization, the game presentation team, et cetera, put together some really amazing partnerships and also fan moments. So we've worked with the Snap Camera Kit since 2022, and it launched exclusively at Rams home game. And I think part of it is, yes, we can put lenses on people's faces and make funny moments, but we've also turned it into monetization opportunities from partners like American Airlines doing their miles grab and things like that. So we've been able to turn something that engages fans, get people paying attention, but also create opportunities with partners. that have become kind of known in our stadium. And now a lot of other teams and buildings leverage the Snap camera kit. The COSM cameras have been absolutely incredible. There are a couple other teams that have implemented kind of this capture system within the end zone and goal line. And part of home field advantage is your ability to show replays and how you show replays, the speed to replay, the angle of the replay. How do you help both the refs, the coaches? How do you create that? And so the COSM cameras have been really exciting to see the real-time nature of it and the angles they can take, how zoom in they can get. It's been pretty amazing. We've done a couple different things with a company called Around and Shared Reality. So we've continued every year to bring on new partners to be able to test things. And I think we're a team that wants to be first to market, isn't scared to test, isn't scared to say, wow, that was amazing. Or, hey, that didn't quite work. Let's try something else.
With regards to COSM, I mean, that's something that we don't have over here. That's something I've watched fairly enviously in terms of what's possible with that. I mean, in terms of what's required to deliver those broadcasts in those facilities from your standpoint, you said you got specialist cameras. I was wondering if you could just explain what was involved in making sure you get those additional angles for COSM.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple different things. There's the actual venue COSM. And so certain venues have the cameras that enable the venues for people to go and like buy tickets and sit there and watch those events. Then there's also cameras that we have installed on goal lines and end zones so that we can make sure that we are getting as close to real time and understanding the spot of the ball, the spot of a knee, those sorts of things. So they're two separate things, but all still through COSM. And I think that you'll see both our football team, again, going back to the football team and the business side coming together to say this is an investment worth it, because it's also incredible as a fan to watch those cameras in real time, zoom in and show you where Puka's toes were when he caught the ball. But it's also advantageous to the coaches in the booth to say, should coach challenge that? Should we call, what's next? So I think it's the partnership that enhances the fan experience, but also really helps our home field advantage.
If we go back to the role of data and the work that you do with Genius, from your standpoint, is there a particular data point that resonates more than others for fans, something that really gets the fan base going? Or is there something you'd like to track, or something, again, you're talking about speed and how quickly Matthew Stafford can release the ball. I mean, what are some insights that have been that you've seen that have really piqued your interest or your fans' interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think the continued feedback that the feature is exciting and that people like it, right? Both from the football side and the fan side. I think the route trees is also something that's really exciting. I think people want to see how a play develops and where it goes from start to finish. And then attaching the speed on top of that, again, it's just something that when you watch in real time, I don't think you realize how fast it is. And I think for those people who are watching it at home really don't understand it either, right? So I think it's something that makes the in-bowl experience pretty special to be able to see that while it's happening. So I don't know if there's a specific insight other than universally liked by fans, and the sponsor is happy, the team is happy, and something that we want to continue to figure out how we enhance. How can we go and do more next year based on the success of this year?
No, I completely get that. As someone who came into sport through, playing Madden, getting all that sort of visualization of that data definitely appeals. So I completely understand that viewpoint. But if we throw it forward and we start looking ahead, how do you plan on building on what we've done so far? Is there something that are you really looking at next season and what can be done, what fans can expect?
Yeah. So I think every year at the end of the season, we take a hard look ourselves and say, what did we like? What did we not like? We do internal stakeholder interviews from people around the organization. We'll do external stakeholders. We'll talk to season ticket members, talk to partners, and make sure we have a really accurate reflection of like what worked and what didn't work. We want to be really honest with ourselves and really critical in the best way possible. And then start to say what story needs to get pushed most. Like, is it a tech and innovation story? Is it a partnership story? Can they be one and the same? Is it crowd atmosphere? Like, what are those goals going into next year? And I think every year trying to make incremental investments in the things that we want to make sure we test. And we are already planning for 26 as well as 25, knowing that some things take longer to invest in, whether even that's a creative refresh in terms of how things are shown on the board. Do we want to change the layout across the board? The infinity screen is not something that is easy to manipulate. And so I think we all laugh a bit that we have PhDs in the infinity screen and kind of how to program it, what to do there. It just doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes a long lead time. So we don't have anything to share publicly yet as to what we're doing next year or the year after, but we are definitely in the phase of retroing everything and understanding which partners are coming back and how do we enhance the things that are working well. I think one thing that people who aren't as close to football know is that when you're on offense, you have a very different strategy within how you're programming the board, the technology you're using, and what you do on defense, right? You want the crowd loud when you're on defense. So think about strategically what you're putting on the board and how you're leveraging technology and how you're leveraging the board to do so. And then when you're on offense, how are you maybe informing people rather than trying to get the crowd riled up? So I think we think about all of those things holistically before we go into exactly what we want to do for next season.
No, that's an excellent point. I think if, some teams who've celebrated the 12th man with the crowd noise, and I think the idea of using technology to enhance that home advantage is actually something extremely useful. And do the coaching staff, do they ever say there's something that they would like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always want to hear from them, right? And I think looking at Genius Sports specifically, something that they liked, right? COSM cameras and the ability to show replays from a different angle, the speed of which we show our replays, right? I think that's what they care about the most. And then also, how do we educate fans knowing that, right? Quiet on offense, loud on defense. How do we use the board to drive that? How do we drive the fan engagement to help, right? The opposing offense have to call a timeout or draw, how are we drawing offsides? How are we thinking about those things to help push the home field advantage? I think they're always going to voice their thoughts on it. And those are thoughts we want to hear because they're coming at it from a different angle than we are, right? We are there to do both, entertain and create home field advantage. And so we want to know what their thoughts are, right? In terms of sitting with our last offseason, we sat with the head of video on the football side, and he showed us our speed to replay, and it was slow. And this season, it was much faster. So we're always going to sit with them to understand how we can improve for them.
Yeah, I guess, footballers, it's about trying to find those advantages where you can within the framework and technology is this new battlefield, I guess. You very eloquently put the business case forward, but it is also going to have a knock-on effect on the field. You mentioned your roadmap, what would be nice to have, what is going to take a while. And again, I've said this 2 or 3 times, but if you haven't seen the Infinity Screen, it is worth looking at because it's unlike anything in particular I've really seen before. But from specifically a data standpoint, is there anything that you've identified that you would like to bring to the fans? And I guess how selective are you in terms of what data you provide to the fans in the stadium and you provide to, let's say, via your digital channels or your social channels? Do you have to serve different audiences differently? Obviously, there's some things that are going to be universally interesting, but some might matter more to people at home who aren't getting the game day experience.
100%. I mean, I think we sit there and talk about every different audience segmentation and how to hit them differently. We work with Wit Interactive on our Pick'em game, and I think that's scratching the surface with them as it comes to partners, monetization, engagement, and all the things that we can do with them. That's much more an at-home activation or a complementary piece of it. If you're doing it in-game, that's not something necessarily that we are promoting massively on screen. So I think backing up a bit, we will take who's at home and where are they most engaged, who's in the stands and how are they most engaged, and think about that. You obviously sometimes at home have more screens up. You are watching the broadcast and the phone is with you. You're on social media. You're opening the Rams app. You're looking at all the different things that you can be looking at. And then if you're just following along on social, what are the quick highlights that you need to know? What's happening in the game, right? We're using X for really real time, real reactions. How are we putting highlights? When are we putting highlights? I think we think about the social experience very different than in-game, right? In-game, we want to make sure we're using the board. So first and foremost, how are we using the board so that no matter where you're sitting in the stadium, that you can see the necessary information? Are you getting the GIP? Are you getting scores from around the league? Are you getting fantasy leaders? Are you seeing highlights? Are you seeing all of the things that we've programmed regardless of where you're sitting, right? So with a circular board and things that are cut with different aspect ratios, we really want to make sure that we are not blocking you from any sort of necessary information. So I think we think about the blueprint and the layout of the board to make sure we are educating and informing people on all of the necessary things, right? And similar to, right, GIP, 2 scores from around the league, to fantasy stats as like a base package, right? That's like table stakes. Then how do we make sure we're leveling that up and sharing with you more in terms of like the last 10 drives or last 10 throws from Matthew? Like, what does that completion look like when we're doing comparison stats between the other team and the two running backs? Anything like that we can show you to make sure that you feel like your experience is enhanced. To your point about the water cooler conversation, you have things to say. And I think we assume that there are some fans in the building that inherently know the game very well, whether that's because they played, because they've been a fan a long time, to your point, because they play Madden, or you have people that are in the stands that maybe don't know as much, and we're using that to educate them and teach them so they feel more engaged and more aligned to what's happening on the field.
I don't think anything illustrates the difference between British and American sporting fans than you call it a water cooler and I called it a pub argument. So that's a far more eloquent way to put it. We are speaking during Super Bowl week, and unfortunately, the Rams didn't make it. But from your point of view, is there anything that you're looking at from a media content perspective or a tech perspective? Anything you're watching this week?
I'm watching a lot this week. I think this week is always really fascinating with the league and what announcements they want to make. I think always they know the world is watching, right? The world is watching the NFL this week. And so there's bound to be really exciting partnership announcements, tech advancements. I think you never know what they're going to be, but it's always something because you have all the eyeballs, right? There's so many eyeballs on the NFL this week. They have their opening night, which is always really fun from a content perspective, less so from a tech and data standpoint, but more from kind of a lighthearted, fun announcement. As you start to see different panels, you start to see different league executives go through Radio Row. I know I'm definitely reading as much as I can consume this week to understand what's happening. I'm very inspired and excited about the team that we put out on the field. Unfortunately, right, we are not in the game, but I think that the future is bright for the Rams. But Super Bowl week always ears up to what's happening when announcements are coming out in New Orleans.
Marissa, thank you very much for speaking to me.
Of course, and I'll have a pub argument with you any day. So always here for that.
Okay, chaps. I think the only thing left to do is to make a quick prediction for Sunday. Josh, what's the score going to be?
Oh, what's the score going to be? Oh, okay. I thought I was expecting team. I was expecting score.
Yeah, we're getting specific.
Okay. I'm trying to work. Just for a moment, forgot how many points a touchdown gets for a second. Chiefs will win. Oh, what makes sense? 30-25.
Steve, is it going to be a three-peat, or are the Eagles going to save you from having to write that phrase in your copy for the next year?
That will not be in any of my copy. And also, can I just say, I really enjoyed the winner of the Sports Pro NFL Fantasy League, at least on one occasion, trying to remember how many points were there for a touchdown. So I'm trying to think of scores that are actually mathematically possible, but I do think the Eagles win by one clear touchdown. I think it'll be in regulation time because, of course, if it goes to overtime, I'll fall asleep. So who knows who the winner is? But the Eagles, for me, have been the best team of football all season. Chiefs, I mean, they've got that experience, they've got that winning mentality, but they have rode their luck. And even though I said I didn't want to use that term earlier, they've won a lot of tight games this year. But maybe that's testament to the ability of the team to grind out results. Who knows? But I think it's finally time. I think the Eagles will win.
I'll go for the Eagles as well. I have to, don't I, given the Premier League football team that I support. So I'll predict a classic game and say it's going to be 36-33 to the Eagles. I think that works. I looked at previous scores from the last few weeks, so just to make that prediction. But yeah.
Can I just say I've never once supported the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Well, we'll leave the listeners to figure out why that is, Steve. But Josh, Steve, thank you very much for your company, and happy Super Bowl week watching to you and our listeners.